Rise of Hawk, Part 3, Scene 26. Asha swiped at a tear that had escaped her eyes and put down the last of the supplies they'd taken to Eppa. The new building Nama's cell had been moved to was the stone building where they captured Bana. Hawk said there was no record of it being logged in as a rebel building, so it was safe for the moment. At least it was warm and sunny, and if they were there long enough, the garden at the back of the building could be used to produce food. She sighed and trudged out of the dining room, which had beautiful wood floors and wood wall panelling. Turning in at the doorway, she made her way down the hall and started upstairs. Her old shoes made squeaking flop noises on the stairs as she went up. Her whole body and soul felt numb. Her best friend was gone, possibly forever. Her brother was gone. If he wasn't dead already, he would be soon. She put a grubby hand to her mouth to suppress the grief again. She would cry when she was alone. It would not do to let the rebels see the woman they'd put up on a pedestal of Hawk's messenger bare her grief-stricken soul for all to see like any normal person would on the loss of a family member. At the top of the stairs, she made her way down the hall to the north-facing room where Nama was apparently sleeping. The upstairs area felt full, unusually full, but also very quiet. She heard weeping from one room as she passed it, but continued to the far end. It was dark outside, and when she got to the room, the only light came from candles. People lay on the carpet, with bags and supplies piled around them. Others lay on cots, and she sensed pain and injury. Nama stood in the middle of it all. It was then she realised that something must have happened here in Aram while they were away. She stood in the doorway and stared across the shadows at him. To her meagre senses, he seemed like a sharp green flame of utter grief that filled the entire space. This grief was even overshadowing the physical pain present in the room. He looked up. Grief and fear filled his face, and he looked like she felt, as if the world was about to end. What happened? Her voice was a whisper. Cheetah, he swallowed. Hilla. Tears ran down his cheeks, and he didn't need to finish the sentence for her to understand what had happened. She skittered from the doorway around the cots and wrapped her arms around Nama. His grief released hers, and they wept in each other's arms. Nathan escaped. Nama's mental voice was just as distraught as his spoken voice. I know. He came to us. She tightened her shields. They were touching, and even though Nama's telepath rating was only a 3, his range was a 4, and she couldn't have him knowing everything yet, even through her own grief, she had to protect Hawk. Talon. She couldn't even think the rest of the sentence. In her arms, Nama made a choking sound, and impossibly, the green flames multiplied. Scene break. They grieved in each other's arms for what felt like hours, and then he stopped because there didn't seem to be any more tears left. They sat together on the carpet between cots, each resting their head on the other's shoulder. Nama tried to speak, but his voice broke. He cleared his throat and sat up to look at her. I need you to tell Hawk something. She sniffed. Of course. What is it? I'm sorry, Asher. I can't keep following Hawk unless he takes out Cheetah. I won't stand by and let her kill any more of my family. She nodded. I understand. I'll pass that along when I next hear from him. How long will that be? A couple of weeks, I would think. She wiped her face and swallowed. Ara and Bana have gone. Tourists will be gone early in the morning. We have so much to do. He sighed and gave her a brotherly pat on the back. We can do it together. Scene 27. The next day. A van arrived at their new base a little after midday. It was a nondescript white van with its windows tinted black. Asha, from an upstairs window, watched the woman as she got out of the van and knocked on their front door. She was short and stocky, but even from one level up, Asha sensed a strength about her, that this woman was not to be argued with. Asha went downstairs. Few others but rebels would know where they were, and as far as she knew, none of the rebels had a van that was as new as that. Perhaps the woman was lost. She opened the front door and lifted one black eyebrow at the visitor. Yes? The woman was unafraid, despite Usher's deliberate hostility. My name is Karen. I have a delivery for Usher. Usher frowned. From whom? There was mischief in her dark eyes. He said you'd figure it out. Come, let me show you. Brushing the surface of the woman's mind, Usher looked for any sign of deception or a trap, but found none. The delivery wasn't supplies, but two people the woman didn't know. This Karen was not an agent, nor even Psy, though Usher sensed a smattering of static at the edges of her mind. She followed the woman to the back of the van. The door lifted up to reveal a well-upholstered cabin. One person lay on the deck of the van on a stretcher, and another sat next to them. The face of the seated person was heart-shaped and framed with lovely golden brown curls. Deep brown eyes looked up at her. Nalana! Asha ran to the door and helped her get out. You're okay. She wrapped her arms around the girl's slight form. Nalana returned her hug tightly. Yes, I'm okay. She let go and the girl's mouth had a ghost of a smile. But Tay needs help. Tay? It was then Asha looked down at the figure lying next to them. Her brother's face was very badly bruised and swollen. Dried blood caked his black hair and stained the old checkered shirt he wore, but his chest rose and fell in long, even breaths. Asha's voice was barely a squeak. He's alive. Only just, Karen replied. The drug I used to make him seem dead brought him too close to the edge a couple of times, but once it's out of his system, if his broken bones mend properly, he should make a full recovery. Asha touched his shoulder and closed her eyes to fight off sudden tears. He was alive. Her brother was alive, and she wasn't alone in the world. She swallowed. Hawk had managed to do the impossible. For her. Just this once. Asha? Alana's dark brown eyes were wide. Nathan's a spy. She smiled at the girl's innocent fear. I know, Nala. I know. Help me get Talon inside. Marcus is here. He's been out of his mind with worry for you. Asha grabbed the ends of the stretcher and pulled Talon mostly out of the van. When Alana had her end secure, they walked back towards their building. She glanced at Karen as they passed. Thank you. Tell him thank you. Scene 28, 19th of Mekra, 3 weeks later. Cheetah stood in the doorway of an abandoned factory. The empty building wrapped its broad shadows around her like a cloak and hid her from the rebels she was watching outside. She hadn't yet traced them back to their primary building, but the Tolan man was not shielded telepathically, so it was only a matter of listening in until she could find reference to their building location and complete her mission. The rebels used a neighbouring building tucked behind the others as a storage facility for non-spoiling supplies. She'd already looked around before their van turned up. A single room upstairs was dry enough to house boxes of clothes, tinned food, and a couple of large metal stills, and many sealed storage containers with medical supplies inside. The room wasn't even locked, but on the outside the building looked as if it had been abandoned for 50-odd years, so very few raiders would think it was worth the effort to investigate. The 4 or so rebels outside were slowly unloading supplies from a battered white van, carrying them into the building and then returning with the supplies to be loaded up. The van looked as if the only thing keeping it running was love and duct tape. Paint was chipped and metal siding dented. There were some bullet holes in the body of it, and a massive crack ran across the windscreen, obscuring the view of the front passenger. Cheetah's jaw tightened and she sighed. Her mission was to hunt down Nama Ree. He was the last free descendant of the original rebel leader, Journo Ree. She was not happy about this mission. She'd found out in her research that Nama was her Nanny Jean's baby brother, which meant that he was her father's uncle. He was family. She swallowed. She didn't want to do it. She wasn't even sure if she could. But she would have to attempt it, because that's what she had to do to keep herself and her father alive. Sighing, she dipped back into the Tolan man's mind. The faster she got this over and done with, the less painful it would be. But you've only been together for a year. How do you know she's forever? Nama walked next to the Tolan man, Marcus, as they made their way from the warehouse to the van with their supplies. How did you know about Carla? Marcus said defensively. Nama shrugged. I just knew. But we didn't get married for 2 or 3 years. It's best to take these things slowly. You're both young. You've got plenty of time. She sensed Marcus pull his mouth into a pout. Well, I'm going to ask her anyway. Nama laughed, and she sensed Marcus's embarrassment. We can have a long engagement. I love Nalana. There's nothing more to think about. They pushed their boxes into the van and turned back towards the warehouse. She sensed something behind her that she couldn't define and withdrew from the Tolan's mind. Too late to react, she felt a gun barrel touch the small of her back, and she stiffened. The person inside the building with her had tight mental shields, so tight she couldn't even sense their gender, and certainly couldn't break their shield before they pulled the trigger. If they were a rebel, they were definitely at least an A2 trained ex-agent. Cheetah. The voice was low and gravelly. Male. You're trespassing on my territory. Get yourself reassigned to internal assassin, or the next time I find you watching these rebels, I will kill you. Snorting at the man's presumption and bravado, she turned to address him. Listen, whoever you... The weapon fired and a sharp agony pushed through her chest, making breathing impossible. She let out a wheezy moan and fell to the grubby concrete floor. The last thing she saw before unconsciousness took her were the shiny black shoes of a suited agent. Whoever had shot her was no rebel.